Welcome, everyone. My name is Piper Hendricks. I'm the CEO of Stories Change Power, and we're so glad that you're here. Let me know if you're having any trouble with audio issues. We had a couple hiccups with the video earlier, but I still am really grateful. On my end, I could hear the song that Brian selected and all the energy, and really grateful for that. Great to see people coming in from all over the country. Someone who is a cyclist, you are inspiring me to get out despite the heat, so thank you for that. I will introduce Brian in just a moment. For now, I just want to share 4 quick reminders for our webinars. Number one, we've got captions enabled, so if that's helpful to you, please use those anytime. Second, we've got a chat open for constructive conversation among humans. We don't allow AI. Your AI is welcome to watch the recording. The recording will not include the chat. That's just for us who are here on the call today. Third, we've got a Q&A box. You should see that right in the middle of the bottom of your screen where you've got questions. Please put those in that Q&A. It's easier to make sure that we see your questions. They don't get lost in the stream of the chat. If we can't reach your question today, rest assured we will aim to get to it either on LinkedIn or a future newsletter. We want to get you the information that you need and what's on your mind. And fourth, you are off camera as a webinar and your microphone is off, so feel free to make yourself comfortable as we dive in. One quick note about Stories Change Power's programming. Amidst our deep appreciation for storytelling, we never forget the dignity of the people involved, particularly folks whose stories are being shared. On August 2nd, that is a Saturday coming up, faster than I can believe it, we are offering a 1-day intensive course on ethical storytelling. So if you want to make sure that at every single step of the way, you are centering dignity in your storytelling, I would love for you to join us that day. And with that, it is an absolute pleasure to introduce Brian Walker, who is bringing over 15 years of experience across media, corporate strategy, and community engagement to align purpose with performance. Brian combines brand strategy with being a cultural impact leader who specializes in building stories and partnerships that move people and markets. He's the CEO of Picture Motion, which is a social impact agency that develops national campaigns to connect entertainment, advocacy, and real-world action. So already you can see why we're so excited to bring him on today. Brian previously led major multicultural marketing and advocacy investments at the Walt Disney Company, and also worked on initiatives at Color of Change and Participant Media that brought together brands, creators, and communities to shift perception and policy. Brian shares our people-centered approach, knowing that it's not enough for storytelling to be compelling, it should also be co-created with the communities that it aims to reach. And I love that we can sum all of that up with Picture Motion's tagline, which is "Stories can change the world, and we make sure that they do." Welcome, Brian. It is a joy to have you with us today.
Thank you, Piper. Can everyone hear me okay?
Thumbs up here. Let us know in the chat if there's any trouble. As always, we are going to start off with a poll. It is really helpful for us to know who's joining today. That should be popping up in just a moment. With your feedback, we can make this as helpful as possible. And today we've got 3 questions. The first is, how long have you worked in advocacy? There's a range of options there, from you're a professional who's been here over 10 years, and for folks who are brand new, or maybe you're not even working in a field that's related to advocacy. So you'll see those options there. Question 2 and 3 are multiple choice. Question 2, stories can change culture, policy, people, history, or all of the above. And then question 3, how do you use stories in your work, assuming that you do? And that's fundraising, internal culture development, stakeholder engagement, narrative change, or other. So as you've got time to complete the poll, that should be in front of you. I'm seeing some answers come in. If it's easier to pop those questions and answers into the chat, the questions will be in the chat. If it's easier to answer there, please feel free. We will give folks, I know it's a little longer today with 3 questions instead of our usual 2, but we're getting some great responses here. We'll give folks a few more moments before we close the poll. I see that number still ticking up. I don't want to cut anybody short. We'll give another maybe 3, 2, 1. All right, if you've not yet answered and you'd like to, please still feel free to use the chat. In the meantime, I'm going to show you those results. It looks like, Brian, we've got a really good variety, several pros on the call, nearly half. And as always, some folks who are not in the field of advocacy, and a lot of folks who are new. So good variety there. Stories can change. Now, this is interesting. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts. About 80% of folks said all of the above. And then we have a vote for all of the other options: culture, policy, people, history. A lot for people, fewer on history. And then how we use stories in our work. Majority of folks using for narrative change, and then less than half on, about 20% on other, about half on stakeholder engagement, less than half on internal cultural development, and about a third on fundraising. So I will stop sharing that poll. Thank you everyone for your feedback. And with that, Brian, I will turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Piper. And thank you everyone for joining. I know see some really great friends and colleagues in the chat or in the list today. So some folks may know the work that we do, but others really want to share, what we do at Picture Motion, but also my personal story and really how I got here, because I think that's important and it really reflects, why I do the work that I do. So let's get started.
Awesome. Brian, over to you, and I will be moving along. I think tell me if I've gone too far.
No, this is perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to kind of give an overview, the first slide actually is a great example of a impact campaign that we've led at Picture Motion. Particularly, it was most recently this Deaf President Now is a film about the Gallaudet University movement for a deaf president in 1987. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but wanted to kind of share that as a great example of some of the work that we've led at our organization and ways that stories can be extremely powerful, particularly those that have been unheard and underrepresented. Next slide. So going into my own personal story, I always think that that's really important to establish kind of why I do the work. This is a picture of particularly my family, some of my family members. I'm there in the middle with the bottle, but I come from a small family in inner city Philadelphia. I have some cousins over on each side, and then my brother is actually in really hugging me, and then my grandmother is actually the one holding me. But really, this tells a story of a family that was impacted by every instance of racism, discrimination, systemic prejudice in Philadelphia. Really during one of the worst times during the crack epidemic in Philadelphia, but really continue to be tight knit. My cousin in the back, she is kind of my close sister, cousin in many ways, but really just kind of tells the story of my foundation. Next slide. This is actually a unique picture. When I was 5, we moved, my particular family moved to the suburbs. If you can barely see me in there, but I was one of the only Black students in my class for the longest period. I think this is important because it really shapes kind of who I became in the work that I do, why I see the world the way I do, and how it's helped me to kind of want to create bridges, which I think is an important theme of this conversation today. Next slide. Here's just another picture of myself and my father. My father is an immigrant from Jamaica, came here in 1975, really at the age of 18 with, very little, as so many immigrant families start here in America, but it really shapes kind of how I approach my work, the way in which I connect with immigrant communities and immigrant stories, particularly, but also grounded in the traditional kind of African American story. And so I think it's an important part of who I am today as well. Next slide. So this is a really unique picture. It's actually a picture of a private school close to my home. It was actually a home that I moved to when I was in 7th grade. it's a unique picture. I didn't go to this school, but it is actually a catalyst for, I think, in many ways, why I do the work that I do. So in particularly in 2001, was actually at this school. Or just kind of going back when I was growing up, I had a real interest in being a civil rights attorney. That was really my focus. And for the longest time, wanted to be someone like Johnny Cochran and Thurgood Marshall and so many others that helped to really change policy and legislation through specifically legal practice. But one evening at this school, I was actually arrested. And it was a unique experience because I was arrested with not others that look like me, but actually it was several white kids who themselves came from kind of affluent backgrounds. And in many ways, because of who I was with that night, we were not treated as so many of my peers, as particularly my cousins. Actually, on the first picture of my family, one of my cousins there on the right, he was incarcerated for a long time before he died. But we had really completely different journeys in our experience with the criminal justice system. And I knew from that very moment that stories played a big role in how the stories that we told ourselves about communities, about people, and the way in which those stories were used for policing and advancing equity and justice in society. And so this will kind of always be something that is a part of my story and how I changed that night to start thinking about how I can use stories to create change, and actually started writing a script about this incident and about the kind of parallel societies that I believe that we lived in, based on the communities that we lived in, based on the way in which we saw each other differently. Um, Next slide. So this actually is the beginning. After high school, I went to college at Howard University. I knew that I really wanted to, as I said, tell stories and be a film producer. Coming from immigrant background, though, my father was not in a place where he was going to allow me to get a film degree, and so I actually got a business degree and in undergrad at Howard University. And but I continued to cultivate my interest in working in film, working with filmmakers. So I actually helped to start a student program at the Cannes Film Festival called the Creative Mind Group. It was a program where we were taking students from a variety of backgrounds, particularly HBCUs, but folks from all backgrounds, initially to the Cannes Film Festival to provide them with a really clear pathway to start their careers in the entertainment industry. And that really helped to me to start to see the need for representation both in front of the camera and behind it. I continued to lead that organization as a COO for about 9 years into law school, which I'll talk about next. But this is definitely a defining moment for me in the work that I continue to lead today. Next slide. So as I said, I went back. Actually, after undergrad, I went out to Los Angeles, worked in the film industry, worked at New Line Cinema, worked at Fox. But I knew that I still had a passion for social justice and social impact, and civil rights as a whole. But I knew that I wanted to leverage it in ways that would help to really shape the representation of Black and Brown folks in the entertainment industry, as well as our stories. And so I went back to Howard University School of Law, where I focus really on entertainment and intellectual property. I say that because I think this continued to help me cultivate not only my own practice and my theory, but also my relationships. So I helped to lead an organization called the Sports Entertainment Law Students Association at Howard, where we hosted an annual forum. I actually got a chance to invite and bring out folks like Issa Rae. The second picture in the middle is Matthew Cherry. Matthew Cherry is actually the director of Hair Love, which won Best Animated Short back in 2019. Also during this time, I started production companies for creatives who were working at the intersection of digital and storytelling, and specifically underrepresented creatives, and worked with a young woman, Andrea Lewis, who was a former actress on Degrassi and really helped to shape her web series Black Actress, where we brought on Tatiana Lee and Issa Rae as really incredible producers. In addition, I worked really closely with an organization called BSLA, the Black Entertainment Sports and Lawyers Association, and that was an opportunity for me to engage mentors and folks who are leading not only in front of helping folks in front of the camera, but also behind the camera on shaping stories. Particularly, the picture at the top right is Judy Smith. If you're familiar with Scandal, she is the inspiration behind that, and so I got a chance to connect with her during my time there, and that was a great moment as well. Next slide. I continued this work after law school, where I worked at Participant Media. During that time, I helped to lead two of their larger impact campaigns. One was Teach, which was about the inspiration that teachers provide and the challenges they face. It was really my longest running campaign, 18-month campaign. We did everything from building a Thank You Teacher Hub to hosting hundreds of screenings. We sponsored and hosted a screening at the White House for the White House Film Festival. We also led a campaign for Hineni Malala, about Malala Yousafzai and her challenges, the challenges that girls and young women face getting an education around the world. And we hosted over 100,000 students went through field trips to go and see the film through a program that we developed through Donors Choose. But really an opportunity to continue to advance ways that stories can be a catalyst for change. Next slide. After participant media, really, I looked at I looked at the moment. Trayvon Martin, you had Tamir Rice, you had all these things happening in the beginning of the BLM movement, and I knew that I needed to leverage my experience to help support the movement in so many ways. And so I was able to really find a role at Color of Change after participant media. They were just about to start a Hollywood office, and so I was able to join as the inaugural director of that office. Within that role, really helped to engage writers' rooms and influencers to help them leverage their influence and their power in the industry to drive racial justice and to make sure that their stories were authentic and accurate and impactful in so many ways. And so we really did a number of things. One of the series we worked on was called 7 Seconds, created by Venus Sood, starring Regina King. We also worked on 13th. Actually, was the first partnership I had with Picture Motion, where we launched the campaign to support that and hosted a number of screenings with our members. Hosted a variety of influencer and what we call textathons events with folks like Kendrick Sampson, Megan Good, where we brought together members to help actually engage the voter process and get out to vote season in 2016 for particularly the presidential election at the time. And then another really amazing thing was we helped to shape an episode on Blackish, which was about police brutality. And that was an opportunity for us to really, get into popular culture and create something that resonated and that I think left a mark for the rest of the Hollywood ecosystem. Last thing we did was also we commissioned a variety of research, but our first was called Race in the Writers' Room, which I'll talk a little bit about more later on. But it was a research project that we partnered with UCLA Rob Bunchy Center on really showcasing the lack of equity and representation in writers' rooms across Hollywood. And so that was more of a systemic approach. But next slide. Another after Color of Change, really had an incredible opportunity to shift into a major studio and really a part of a major enterprise. I found a role at the Walt Disney Company where I was able to join the enterprise diversity inclusion team. They really understood the work that I was doing at Color of Change and the power of engaging local community partners and folks who are underrepresented to tell really authentic stories. And so I was brought into a role leading stakeholder engagement for multicultural communities. And within that, really led a variety of marketing initiatives and cultural competency development for our key leaders. So we've worked on Black Panther, really helped after the release, that to be really leveraged by local community partners. Picture was actually at ABFF, where we hosted a conversation with Ryan Coogler. Another really major moment, which is kind of an instance of really unique social change. When Wreck-It Ralph 2 was about to come out, it was about 8 months into my tenure. There was a moment where the princesses, there was actually a princess sequence in Wreck-It Ralph 2 where they were not represented by their initial features, particularly their features as young women of color. Interesting enough, Color Change had found out about this through other kind of social media folks and were interested in starting a campaign. So that image on the bottom is them sending out particularly a post over one weekend when the initial still image came out about Wreck-It Ralph 2, and they contacted me almost immediately and said, "Hey, this is what we're going to do." I think it was on a Friday afternoon. Maybe next week they would plan to start a campaign. In response, I was able to coordinate and organize the heads of the studios at Disney Animation, our chief diversity officer, the head of diversity at Disney Studios, and really work with them by Monday to come up with a solution on bringing Color of Change and other community leaders, community advocates who represented all of the other princesses of color into the editing room. And we had time to work with them over the course of over 6 weeks to help make sure that the images and the rendering of these princesses was accurate and representative of, with their original characterizations. So that was a huge win in not only creating a process for stories and creating a process, particularly for animation going forward, but I also think it created a huge win in specifically how Disney could engage community partners for future projects, whether it was park experiences or content development. And then lastly, was able to work on Soul along with a bunch of other projects from West Side Story to Encanto, but particularly Soul helped to really shape an advisory council of advocacy leaders, of community leaders, to help support the other creative consultants on the film and make sure it was representative of what the community wanted to see, and ultimately led to a Oscar win, Best Animation win. And so was really happy about that, got a credit, but that will always be kind of a big moment as well in my journey. Next slide. Oops, next slide. So this slide is actually, I wanted to jump into the work that we do at Picture Motion and really just kind of ground us in the practice of social impact that we're leading, leveraging stories. Before we get started, I think this should play. It's actually our pitch. No, it's fine. I can send the link later on. If you go back to the last slide or last two slides, sorry. I'm going to go to.
Is this the right one, Brian? Are you wanting?
You can go to the first one for Picture Motion. That's fine.
There we go.
Yeah, and I know we're coming up on time, so I want to make sure we leave time for questions.
There we go.
So overall, Picture Motion, we are an award-winning social impact agency. Really, we've worked on campaigns for over 13 years now. Over 400, I think even now 450 titles that we worked on, from short films to feature films, documentaries, scripted films, series, really a full range of content, as well as clients. And so worked with most of the major studios and networks who are developing really impactful content, to help them to connect their content to local audiences, to education audiences, and really drive social change and for a number of topics and themes. Next slide. As you can see, we kind of have a few buckets and the types of partners that we work with, from distributors and studios, filmmakers and production companies, foundations and nonprofits, as well as brands, who develop content, short form content, long form content, even commercial content, and leverage that content for ways that drive impact. Next slide. As I said, through our 13 years, I've worked on a full range of projects, as you can kind of see, from some really high-end projects to so many other independent projects as well, some digital series, and really proud of the work that we've led in driving a full range of impact and audience engagement, in ways that we believe in many ways are unprecedented. And so, next slide. Through this work, we see ourselves as we build movements around stories. We work with the world's best storytellers. We partner with them to drive awareness, engagement, and action. We really help them to develop what that clear strategy is, whether it's policy, narrative change, culture change, or really discrete, localized education. Really look for ways that we can leverage these films and these titles, to engage audiences in completely new ways, and to support also on the ground advocates, and grassroots leaders who are driving the work every day. Next slide. We believe that stories and experiences have the unique power to catalyze powerful social good. As I said, through my own personal journey, I have leveraged my own personal story to drive social change, and we believe that other people's stories, other people's depictions of other people's lives have the power to do that work. And so it's really why we continue to work today as hard as we do. Next slide. And so we do that through a number of ways: open minds, build communities, empower audiences, and really drive engagement. And we see that as not only an ethical imperative, but also a business imperative. These studios, these independent filmmakers come to us because they understand that the ability to engage new audiences is audience growth, is commercial success. And so we look for ways that we can intersect the work of impact, with the work of business success and overall accomplishment. And so really is a part of our larger approach to our work overall. Next slide. I think we'll get into theory. And one of the things is we do this work really not on our own. We do this work with partners. We have an advisory board that we work with really consistently, representative of major organizations. I see Drew Hall is here today, but really across the gamut of issue areas. These folks we connect with every time we have new campaigns, to figure out ways that we can align with their existing work. These obviously are folks at the national and kind of more scalable level, but we also do this with so many other localized partners as well. And we really wouldn't be successful without them. Next slide. So first and foremost, storytelling is social impact strategy. We believe that storytelling has the ability to drive shape norms, values, and vision, overall. We believe that it builds belief in what's possible. Data is one thing, but stories can really take us to the next level. And so it's one of the reasons that we have been at the forefront of this work. One last thing is just it connects individual emotion to collective action. As I said, my story is personal. I Am Greta is such a unique example of that. You know, her story as a climate justice activist. She has kind of leveraged her own personal journey to connect with people of all backgrounds, people of all ages now, across the world to drive a global climate movement. And so I think it's really the opportunity to leverage stories is an opportunity to drive social change, even when you don't believe that there's a capacity to drive social change. And so I think there's ways in which we can leverage everyone's story to do that, whether it be long form content or short form content. And so through this campaign, particularly, we led over 30 screenings across four major issue areas, really engaged over 3,000 girls and activists and young people. And through our campaign, 98% of surveyed audience members said they were compelled to take action after watching the film. And so it's really an example of ways that social impact can be driven by one person's unique story. And I'll kind of leave with this quote: "The most powerful weapon in the world is a story." It's a great quote. Ishmael B. He's a former, actually, child soldier who wrote a book about his journey and how he wanted to bring his story to the mainstream, and really leveraging his story was the most powerful part of his journey. And so I think it's a great example of why this really exists. Next slide. uh, Really anchoring in theory of change is how we drive almost all of our campaigns. You know, whether it is long-term outcomes that we want to see be accomplished or short-term outcomes, we really try to make sure that we are understanding, you know, what the outcome of those issues needs to be. A great example, Aftershock is a really great campaign, one of my favorite campaigns that I've been able to work with over the last few years. It is a film about the Black maternal health crises that continues to, really disrupt. I was actually at an event yesterday where Allison Felix, former Olympic runner, was talking about her birthing journey, and really how she talked about 80% of the women who have been impacted by the maternal health crises is in so many ways preventable. I know my own partner faced significant challenges through birthing for both of our children. I literally had to leverage my own legal background in order to prevent unneeded interventions during the birthing process. And so Aftershock was not only an impactful story for so many others, but also for myself. But for this campaign, we really identified ways that we could not only drive and help to support the passing of the Omnibus Act, which is a big moment for bringing this issue into the federal landscape and to driving more funding and more support. But also, how do we change the practice of patient care across the life cycle of particularly Black patients, particularly Black birthing patients? And so we knew it needed to start from as early as medical school and even before that. So for this campaign, we hosted over 215 screenings, many of them at medical schools, at nursing schools, with hospital networks, with insurance companies, all of these major stakeholders, and what is needed to incorporate new practices, new education, new awareness around this issue. Overall, I think this campaign was a huge success. We hosted a major conversation with the sponsors of the Omnibus Act a month before it passed in the House. And then we also hosted a conversation with key male influencers and ways that, men and particularly fathers can be sources of prevention and of advocacy around this issue. And I think it really was about understanding what that theory of change was and what did we want to see at the end of the 6 to 8 to 12 months after the campaign, and how will we drive that home through our activation, through our initiatives, through our activities with community partners. Next slide. So, what makes a story compelling and constructive, at the end of the day, the practice and the idea of telling stories is throughout time. We know that tension, conflict rooted in real systems, is a part of that, creating compelling stories. We know truth, really telling, not just creating new fiction from personal experiences, but telling real, discrete truth is so important in connecting with other people who've experienced similar incidents, similar live journeys. And so truth is a big part of it. I always try to ground any of the storytelling that I'm working with and the development of that is based in truth. Even going back to Soul, if you look at, there's a scene in the barbershop that was deeply rooted in the personal truth and personal experience of so many Black men. Particularly here for Color of Care is a great example. Color of Care was a film that was released by the Smithsonian Channel and Paramount back in 2022. It was about really the history of medical bias in our country, but how it was exacerbated by the moment during COVID in those first few years, and how it showed a spotlight on the ways in which particularly Black and Brown patients were more vulnerable to the breakdowns in our systems, the breakdowns in our access to healthy foods, to healthy, just healthy mental health care, all of these things. And so, a part of this campaign, we hosted over 130 screenings. But one of the things we also did in order to shape the campaign at the very beginning was we developed an advisory board. We developed this kind of body of leaders, medical practitioners, of leaders at the federal level, deans of medical schools, influencers even, who focused on medical bias in helping to shape how we would go out with the campaign, how we would message the campaign with partners, how we would host these different events, how we would shape the education materials and the impact hub that we developed also with Smithsonian Channel and our partners. But really, it was a way in which we were leveraging the real experience of these practitioners and of the people to help shape this campaign and make sure that we were able to invite these different stakeholders, similar to Aftershock, in to really drive change in all of their different systems. So I think really just another great example of how to create a compelling and constructive story, really grounded in truth and real reality. Next slide. Narrative theory and practice, why stories move people. So there's a couple theories that I was doing some research on and really thinking about. One particularly is narrative transportation theory. Stories reduce resistance to new ideas. But the idea of narrative transportation theory is like immersive story world development. There's no greater example of that than Black Panther. The idea of this fictional world where Black people have not been colonized, have had agency throughout history, set off a deep change in culture, in storytelling, in how we invested in storytelling for Black and Brown stories for now years. But in addition, but it also changed other practices, and seeded many other opportunities for impact. One great example I'll always bring up with folks is there was a really amazing campaign that was started by an organization called Movement for Black Lives, on top of Black Panther, which was called Wakanda, Vote for Wakanda, Wakanda the Vote. And it was really an opportunity to leverage all of the amazing pop cultural resonance, the way in which communities were going out to see the film multiple times, where they had voter engagement and voter registration at screenings across the country. And in many ways, the research is there that this helped to spark the 2018 watershed moment where we saw the most elected officials, women elected officials during that period. And in many ways, this, along with other cultural campaigns, kind of created the grounding for that. But I think these are the ways in which a story that was about agency, that was about collective power, that was about communities coming together and celebration and joy, really helped to shape broader society in reality. Next slide. Why unheard voices stay unheard. So one of the things that I wanted to just quickly touch on is, whether historical and systemic marginalization is still a part of our everyday lives in the entertainment industry. Even as we've seen really great progress over the past few decades, we still see a real lack of inclusion when it comes to power. And one great example, when I was at Club Change and we put together the Race in the Writers' Room report. It was really about the ways that first and foremost, just Black and Brown folks were underrepresented as writers, as just regular junior and staff writers in these spaces, but also how they were isolated and tokenized. We really understood that it takes not just one Black writer in a space, which in most cases, most diversity programs have led with. It takes, two to three to, some level of a critical mass in these spaces for there to be a real voice. And so that's one of the reasons we continue to see this marginalization in these spaces. And so there really still needs to be a change. And we know it, disparities in funding and access to media, and access to distribution and advertising and brands. All these kind of play a role in why we continue to see a lack of representation, a lack of greenlighting of Black and Brown stories as well. And I love the quote with Maya Angelou as well with that one. Um, uh, yeah, you can take the next slide. Bridging divides through stories. So one of the things I know we wanted to touch on today was the ways in which we've seen stories drive connections across polarized communities. So what we've seen is first and foremost, a couple of things that we try to keep ourselves aligned with is that we need to center stories of shared humanity. We need to use stories to reduce polarization and tell stories that model listening, not just winning. No great example than the Deciders, one of our campaigns from actually last year. It was a film about a community, Whiteville in North Carolina, where the incredible organization Patriotic Millionaires really worked on a listening tour as well as just an entire civic education program and civic activation program with community members who were from varying backgrounds. So traditionally white kind of Republican voters and Black progressive or Democratic voters in this town to specifically focus on the issues of taxation of the minimum wage in North Carolina as it was still stagnated at the federal level, but the ways in which they could come together to advocate as a whole, as a group, to bring this awareness to their state house, as well as to other cultural leaders across the South. And so we see this as a great example. During that time, we hosted 25 grassroots screenings. But really, if you want to see a blueprint for bringing communities together for building bridges, the Deciders is one of the best ones to see, from the time that they do the listening tour and initial really engagement with the community members and at dinner parties, all the way to training these incredible citizens, these incredible people who are underrepresented in policy to speak in front of their state legislators and really show them that they have the power. Next slide. So what we see is continue to kind of see storytelling across differences, best practices for nonprofits, lead with questions, not assumptions, pair storytelling with dialogue tools, screening guides, other materials designed for resonance across values and culture. Don't design for policy positions. Understand that people are complicated. They live complicated lives. And so understanding that when you're shaping the stories that you have, when you're shaping your campaigns is really important. I bring up Atomic Hope, which is a campaign that we led last year as well, which was really about a organization, Generation Atomic, and the work that they've led at the student level to drive awareness that nuclear energy in many ways is the cleanest non-renewable energy source, but that there's been a really I would say complicated narrative since the major nuclear power plant I would say major catastrophes, but the ways in which we need to educate the next generation on the power of nuclear energy. Honestly, it was a personal evolution for me. I had no idea about so many of these issues, so much of this information. But we saw also a massive change in even activists that we worked with. We hosted a conversation during the campaign where we had several environmental activists actually join us and kind of learn or take the time to tell people about the learnings that they had, the journey that they had, and kind of understanding the power of nuclear energy, how it can be harnessed in a much cleaner way and what's needed. Now, wherever you land, obviously on this issue, it was really just a great example of like how we bring people together and we get past assumptions and we start having real dialogue around issues that may sometimes be, highly controversial. And so, really great example. If you want to check out a campaign, I can always share even rap reports on these, but just a really great example of what can be done with bridging the divide. I'll jump in. Maybe we can jump into questions after this. My last two slides were really just more on the. This is a great one. I think narrative is infrastructure. The idea of moving from moments to movements, to using storytelling to do that. I think P&G has done that better than any brand in the past decade. Specifically, we worked on a campaign called LFG, where they were supporting the national women's soccer team in the fight for equal pay, but it really represented P&G's larger campaign for social justice and social equity. If you're familiar with, they did a whole series around racial justice called The Talk, and so many others. And so really, I think represents not only their a one-time effort, but also a massive cultural shift that they've had as an organization, and I think has been successful in driving really business growth for them as an organization as well. So I can share more of these, but I definitely want to get us to a place where we can talk through them. If you want to, we can jump into it.
Okay, good deal. Brian, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate hearing your story and your clarity around the power of story and then how that's led you into the impact you've had across your career. I feel like technology stole about 5 minutes or so
Yeah,
from us.
sorry
Would
about that.
you? No, no. Would you be able to stay on
Yeah,
another
no, I'm
minute?
totally fine. Yeah.
Okay. And folks, if we understand timing is what it is. If you've got to go straight to another meeting and have a question, please pop that in the Q&A. I will start. There's so many places, and I do want to flag also, there's so much content on your slides, really helpful input for storytelling practices for advocates. So I encourage folks, if you were not able to take notes on all of that, don't worry, it will be in the recording. But I'd love to dig into something. We're seeing a comment about the power of story, and also I'm hearing a bit about narrative and sort of a larger story. And you and I had we touched on this, the difference between the two. I think people often use story and narrative interchangeably. And you noted how you've seen a shift around the notions of narrative and culture change. Can you define that for folks and help understand the role in working toward the world we want to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of going back to that one of the last slides, from moments to movements. The idea of stories themselves, in many ways, are discrete. They are individualized experiences that, we all face. We have our own personal story experience. But I think the narrative and culture change are about systems and systems change in many ways. what is the narrative is what is the stories that we are telling ourselves, as I mentioned kind of at the beginning of my personal journey, the way in which, the narratives that we tell ourselves are the reasons that, policing is very unequal and disparate in communities of color. The ways in which, banks and financial institutions or medical institutions treat Black and Brown patients differently are the narratives that we've told ourselves systemically as society. And culture is really based on the practices. How do we employ those practices into our everyday lives? So in many cases, it could be a kind of unintentional, where culture is just about how we're engaging each other, how we're talking about each other, how we are treating each other. That's really where you see the kind of understanding of what culture change is. So it's the practice of kind of our human engagement, and our human communication overall. And I think the narrative really shape our practices as much as possible. So I think if I look at that as a continuum, those initial stories are, discrete. And when you combine so many stories together, you can really drive a change in narrative and then hopefully a change in practice, which is kind of our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. And I'm seeing a comment here from Felicia, who's working on a civil rights history documentary and is saying that your input will be invaluable. Felicia, I'm so happy to hear that. And we've got a great question. I hope that I'm pronouncing this correctly. Sunny, who says their family is also Jamaican, and great to see how far we've come. Wonderful. And asking, can you talk more about decentering whiteness in mainstream media and how you've seen that evolve and any potential difficulties, particularly in combination with broader social movements?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think where we see Wakanda being one great example of that. I even think about Sinners most recently as another great example. I think Ryan Coogler has done such a great job through his body of work. But where we're seeing the centering of Black stories, Black history, Black lives, we've seen an evolution of that. And one of the things I always kind of tell people is that cultural advocacy is really an evolutionary practice. I think we saw an uptick in representation of folks on screen after maybe Oscar So White and the release of Black Panther. We saw a small increase. And I think we're kind of seeing, as someone asked me, I was literally talking to some interns yesterday, and they felt like we were going backwards in many ways. They saw, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and there was no Black female representation in that. So I think centering Black stories is going to be always a constant kind of pendulum swing back and forth. We're going to have these kind of trendy moments, and the goal is like, how do we learn from them, both from a investment standpoint, from a marketing and distribution standpoint, from an education standpoint, what are we teaching the next generation of storytellers and how they leverage those case studies for their own projects and the work that they want to do, but also how they engage as audience members, because audiences are extremely powerful. And I think that's what's really helping to sustain some of the work that we're seeing around centering, decentering whiteness and really seeing the representation of immigrant narratives and folks from all different backgrounds, even within like subspaces like disability. We've seen some really amazing white centered disability stories. We're starting to see a real evolution into folks who are from underrepresented backgrounds in those communities as well. And so I think it's a constant evolution of this practice, and something that has been around for now a century. If there's a really great history of cultural advocacy in society. Yeah, I don't know if that
Awesome.
answers the question.
It does, and I feel like we could talk all day, including I think folks are leaving with no lack of film recommendations for this weekend and even the months ahead. We have some great questions here. Giselle and Joseph, I'm seeing those. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so stay tuned and we will answer those either on LinkedIn or in a newsletter. We will get back to you. Great to see the comment here from Bridge Entertainment Labs as well. We're encouraged by how many folks are in the space really wanting to use stories for good good for bringing us back together as a country. If I can sneak in one more, Brian, I know we covered so much. If there is one thing that you want people to remember from today, what would that thing be?
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people, and particularly whether you are new to this work or you've been in this work for a long time, it's like your personal story is your power. When I was at Disney, we literally we tried to educate, particularly folks from underrepresented backgrounds who were employees, who were cast members, that their story was their power as they navigated the enterprise and how they leveraged their unique experiences to help the company do better as an organization. And I think, once people start to feel comfortable with telling their story, they can be really, really strong in helping the organizations that they're at and helping the movements that they're working on and really just kind of shaping their own personal journey for greater success. So.
Amen to that. Well, thank you again, Brian. We will follow up with everyone with a lot of resources that you mentioned. We're putting some links in the chat to stay in touch with Brian and Picture Motion. This is an ongoing series. Next month, August 15th, we will talk about social media listening and advocacy with Dr. Matthew Taylor from Middle Tennessee State University. Hope you will join us then. Right now, as you leave the webinar, a 15-second poll will pop up. Please be a helper and share feedback that helps us shape future webinars. In the meantime, be well, do good, stay healthy and hopeful. And Brian, thank you again. Have a wonderful
Thank you,
weekend,
Barbara.
everyone.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.